Good afternoon. We have with us this afternoon Larry Ramaekers, management consultant from the Ramaekers Group. Thank you for being with us today, Larry.
Thank you for having me.
Our first question is, what are the characteristics of a great leader?
I've not done a lot of study on the theoretical things. I've watched people work, and they're things that I think most people would expect. They're smart, they're decisive, they are truthful and ethical. And I believe if you have those basic characteristics, you can get people to follow you willingly.
What are the greatest challenges you faced as a leader?
I'm going to give you some examples, and you can edit them out if they're... I was running a company that had 100 and some MRI centers rolled up into one company. And it is against the law now for doctors to own the labs they send people to or to profit in any way from sending people to the labs. And I got a request to sign a check for $50,000 to Dr. So-and-so, a marketing consultant. So I went to the people who made the request and I said, what is this really about? And he said, well, he gives us advice and helps us get patients. And I said, sounds to me as if what's really happening is you're paying a doctor for patients. He said, no, that's not what's happening at all. And I said, I won't sign it. And the unfortunate consequences were that the company lost a lot of business. The shareholders got hurt. But as I told them that I didn't look good in orange suits and I wasn't going to do anything that I believed to be illegal. So a lot of people in the company lost their jobs because the business shrunk and the shareholders got hurt. But I think that's the decision that you have to make. The second one I saw was when I go into a company, it's because it's in trouble. Only one does the CEO and the other executives want me there. And when you get in, there's a them and an us. And you're always them. And there's a us group that gets around. I've been there about 4 weeks, and one of the people who I trusted in the company came to me and said, this afternoon, the top 5 executives are going to come in your office and resign en masse unless you do certain things to keep them happy. So I had time to think about it before they came in. And the CEO, as the spokesman for the group, told me that unless I did A, B, and C, that they would all quit this afternoon. So I said, you're fired. And I'll meet with you at 11 o'clock or 2 o'clock about whether or not you're going to stay. And each one I set an appointment. What I found is that people who threaten to quit don't really have another job. If they had another job that was acceptable to it, they would come in and quit. So they didn't have a job. I use the analogy that the story, the good news is you're going to heaven. The bad news is it's right now. And all of these guys wanted to go to heaven, but they didn't want to go now. They didn't want to have to go home and tell mom that they'd just quit without. And they expected we couldn't get along without them. And I learned from this and from other things that I can get along without almost anybody. I may not perform as well, but you can't allow yourself to get intimidated by a group that feels they have power over you in some way. Most of the companies I deal with are either out of cash now or will be shortly. And out of cash and out of credit is out of business. You never can allow yourself to run out of cash. So some of the people that I got called in on could predict going to be out of cash. But I have not yet met a CFO of a Fortune 500 company who knew what his cash was that morning. Wang Labs, the CFO, said, we'll know what our cash is when we close the quarter and do the 10Q. And it's a kind of thing that a successful company doesn't need to worry about what its cash is. They write a check and it cashes. In a troubled company, you have to know what checks you can write. So we'd been working with Wang Labs, knowing that they had some sort of problem. We were trying to sell the job for 2 months. When we got Joy and I were driving up to Charlevoix. It was a 3.5-hour trip up for a nice weekend on the water. No cell phones then. And when we got there, I had a message: charter a plane, get to New York. The banks are going to call a default on Wang when the European dollar market opens at 9 a.m. London time, unless we have reached a solution. So we worked probably 40 consecutive hours to restructure the Wang debt, keep them open and running. I had a company was run by a guy who I looked on as a business god. He had a great reputation, and he got into trouble. And I went there and he said, we have 4 months worth of cash left. So he was somewhat upset with me when I started to do my own cash forecast. He said, here's the cash forecast. On Thursday, after working on it for 3 days, we said, you're not going to run a cash in 4 months. You're going to run a cash in 4 hours. And then you end up in a situation where you can't order product. If you know you can't pay, one of the ethics of insolvencies is you never order product that you know you can't pay for. So once you start not ordering, the word gets out and you couldn't buy things on credit. And if you're already out of cash, not being able to buy on credit just totally shuts you down. And I spoke with the manager, Andy, and said, didn't you and your buddies just put in $30 million 3 months ago to keep it going? He said, yeah, we're going to lose it all. And he said, I feel really badly for these people. They put in $5 million each, and some of them are not even worth $100 million. I fall in that category. So most of the jobs that I get into have serious challenges. And fortunately, one of the things that the student leaders asked me this morning is, how many people do I see with ethics problems? And I have to say that fortunately there aren't many. The American business that I saw, even in troubled companies, are run by ethical people. When they're not ethical, they make the headlines and it looks like the businesses are run by crooks. But I don't generally see that.
How did your engineering education prepare you for leadership?
Now, you may not want to hear this, but it didn't. It taught me how to think. And then I'll give you a story that you may want to edit out. I thought about what leadership lessons did I learn at the University of Florida. And on the way over here, we passed the SAE lion with green paint on his nose. And I thought that was kind of chicken to drive along at 30 miles an hour and throw a paint balloon at the lion. And I said, what we're going to do is we're going to get a mob. We're going to walk up to the lion, tar him, and feather it. So we were coming from one end of the campus and going to the other, and people saw this mob, and it grew into be several hundred people. And I'm feeling pretty confident. And we got to the SAE house, and it was empty except for one very large pledge. And so we start to pour tar on it, and this dumb pledge runs out and grabs somebody. And then somebody at the back of the group starts running, and the ones in front of them look and see the people behind them running, and the next thing you know, this one pledge had 400 people running away. And so I thought I was this great leader that would have a story to tell the grandkids about. And I learned that with a mob or a group, when people see the ones behind them running, they are likely to run also.
Interesting. What other methods of leadership development were important in your growth as a leader?
I learned a lot of things that started at Procter & Gamble. Things that I think, and I've told the student groups this, I think are important for people to understand. Went to P&G offices in Cincinnati and had a introductory training class, and the instructor there asked us, what does Procter & Gamble make? So we put down about 172 things, and green boards full of what we thought Procter & Gamble made. And when we couldn't think of anything more, he erased a circle in it, you wrote, Procter & Gamble makes money. And when you get into business, you'd be surprised at how many people, when you ask them what they make, will say Tide or cars or banking services, and they don't realize that's not what they make. Now, I'm not saying that the only goal of a business should be to make money. Really, your job is to deliver to the shareholders what they want. If you work at Ben & Jerry's, they have other social goods that they want to do. But for many companies, most public companies, their key goal is to make money. The second thing I learned at Procter & Gamble, we figured out after about 6 months after we'd been there. 1959 was the 5th year in a row that P&G was named the best managed company in the country by the AMA. And our group was sitting around having lunch, and we looked at each other and said, if this is the best managed company in the country, we don't dare quit. Because what must the rest of the world be like? And you read all the articles in Forbes or business magazines about these geniuses that if you read the article, you think they never make a mistake. And one of the things I like to teach the young people is every company makes mistakes. Good companies make fewer mistakes, smaller mistakes, and when they know they've made a mistake, admit the mistake and fix it. Bad companies make big mistakes, more mistakes, and won't admit that they made a mistake. One of the interesting things recently, Jamie McCourt, now the ex-wife of the ex-owner of the Dodgers, was accused by the commissioner of baseball of taking money out of the club for her own purposes. She looked at him and said, honey, why else would anyone own a company? And so she understood, her goals were clear as to what she wanted out of ownership of a company. The commissioner thought that owning a baseball club meant you would never do anything to embarrass the group of small exclusive club that owned baseball teams. But she was clear as to why she owned her company. And I met a very impressive group of people today, young students who have learned a lot more than I did in college about things that I think will be important to them in the future. And I think if we can convey to them, I stumbled onto where I am. Some of the decisions I didn't make, I got there accidentally. And I happened to do okay, and that would get you the next job. But I didn't train to be a leader, and the type of leadership that I do doesn't work for most companies. I come in a crisis. I do not have time to build a consensus. I try to be a benevolent dictator, but You're out of cash. You don't have time to, and you will never have all the facts about something. I worked with a guy who, when he got into a project, he kept expanding it till nothing short of the solution of world hunger would solve it, and then he quit because he couldn't resolve it. You can't do that. You've got to make decisions. No decision is a decision, and usually the wrong decision.
What advice would you give to students who want to become great leaders?
Wow. I'm probably a bad advisor. Don't do what I did. A bad example. I think they're either smart or they wouldn't be at the University of Florida. They have to behave ethically. And the other characteristic I found of great leaders is being a good communicator. You got to tell people what you expect and expect them to live up to that. But I also tell them that they don't always do what the king says. In a big organization, just by making a pronouncement doesn't get it done. There's corporate culture, they don't think you're right, therefore they're not going to implement your decision, and when you've got people all around the country or even all around the world, you will not get them to do what you told them to do every time.
You mentioned that your engineering education, you didn't feel adequately prepared you for leadership. What could universities do to support leadership development, or what should they do?
I guess you got to do more than what I'm doing is to learn what leadership. I haven't studied leadership, so I really can't help you much there. But there have to be principles that work, and I think to think about. I didn't think about being a leader. What I told the students this morning is I was probably April of my high school senior year, and I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. So my friend joined the Navy, and I went to my dad and said, "Dad, I'm joining the Navy." He said, "Great." And I said, "But I'm only 17. I need you to sign here." He said, "If you can join the Navy, go ahead, but I'm not signing anything." So I said, "Oh gosh, what do I do?" And I looked at the University of Florida. It cost room, board, books, and food. And $75 a semester got you baseball, football, Dave Brubeck tickets. And I had $700 in the bank, so I said, I can do this. And then I didn't know what I was going to study, so I just took the toughest courses that they offered to freshmen. And when I was a second semester there, this friend of mine said, what are you going to major in? I said, I don't know. He said, "You're doing good in chemistry. Why don't you be a chemical engineer?" And I said, "Oh, okay." By the time I was a junior, I found out I didn't like chemical engineering. But in order for me to change majors, it would have cost me another year, and I didn't have the money to do that. So I graduated as a chemical engineer, knowing that I didn't want to be a chemical engineer, and went out into the world of manufacturing. You got put in manufacturing, you start being put in a position where you lead people. My first jobs out of college, I was half the age of the people that I'm super paid less than any of them, which the plant manager explained to me was fair because I had some upside and they didn't. But each time you succeed, it helps build your confidence. I never started out to be a leader. So I didn't plan a course that got me where I am.
How has globalization impacted leadership?
In the course of my jobs, many of them are multinational companies. And there are certain rules and laws that are different the various countries, and there are certainly differences in culture. Not all non-U.S. citizens would support the goals of an American corporation. Some of them, and I won't mention any by name, are superior to Americans and resent being supervised by an inferior being. And they grow to accept it because it's dangerous not to. But you need to understand the cultures where you are, and you also need to understand that American law travels with you into certain countries. If you want to go to Russia, where you cannot get business without paying a bribe, and you're in an American corporation, you must not pay bribes. You have to walk away from the business. And that, you won't compete well in countries like that.
What key?
Let me find one more thing. The acceptance of women in positions of authority is not universal around the world. So when you bring in women with you, they sometimes have problems in foreign countries.
Are there any countries that are better at promoting women in positions of leadership than the U.S.?
I don't know that any are better. I think the U.S. excels in that, and there are some countries that are far worse.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What key events or people were instrumental in putting you on the path to leadership?
Procter & Gamble was helpful. And one of the people I met this morning is going to follow that path to start. The second thing, I happen to have jobs that helped me. I went from Procter & Gamble. It was a big company that had all sorts of, you did only this much of a job. I went to the Stroh Brewery, another famous chemical factory, that you did everything or didn't get done. And that was helpful, because you had to, there was no industrial engineer to do this, and you did it or it didn't happen. One of the key things was we talked Mr. Stroh into expanding. He had all his money invested, not only in one industry, but in one company in one industry. We talked him into diversification. We went into Coca-Cola bottling factories. That helped me, because I was running small companies around the Detroit metropolitan area. I then decided that we bought Coca-Cola bottlers from people that I didn't think very highly of their skills. And I saw people who were entrepreneurs that made a lot of money. And I said, I can do this. So I bought my own soft drink bottling facility that did okay for 5 years, and then it went bankrupt. In Saginaw, Michigan, in 1981, well, the auto industry died, and Saginaw is nothing if not the auto industry. And I decided that I needed to learn something about why I failed and why other people failed. And then I ran into a guy. I was then 41 and he was 26. He knew where he was going. He had a plan set out, and he was and we were able to get some jobs running companies that you get tossed in and you are a leader. It's like 4 years ago I couldn't spell engineer and now I are one. Well, all of a sudden I are a leader. Have to be. So you just practiced what worked and what didn't.
You've touched on two important themes there. One, an ability to recover from failure and learn from it and do better the next time. And second, practicing leadership like any other skill. I think those are two very good important points.
Good.
Well, Larry, you may not have studied leadership, but I assure you there will be many young people who are going to study you in your career as a guide to their leadership development. So thank you very much for your willingness to share your experiences with us today.
Thank you, Dean.